Well, that phone line could represent a big step for the two Koreas. Sang-mi, we know that the Blue House has now made public the list of officials who will accompany President Moon to the summit. Tell us more about them.
That's right, Devin. The top office announced 6 key aides who will accompany President Moon Jae-in at the Inter-Korean Summit next Friday. They are Chief Secretary Im Jong-seok, National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong, National Intelligence Service Chief Seo-hun, Unification Minister Cho Myung-kyun, Defense Minister Song Young-moo, and Foreign Affairs Minister Kang Kyung-hwa. The spokesperson, however, pointed out that who will sit at the actual summit table will depend on the number of aides accompanying Kim Jong-un. The Blue House added that 2 summit situation rooms will be up and running early next week, one at the Truth Village of Panmunjom and the other at the main press center located in the Kintex Exhibition and Convention Center in Goyang, Gyeonggi-do Province, some 30 kilometers away from Panmunjom. Back to you, Devin.
All right, thank you, Sang-mi, for the update. Our Cha Sang-mi reporting from the Blue House. And speaking of the U.S., Washington isn't giving away anything ahead of its own summit with Pyongyang in terms of the nuclear issue. A Trump administration official on Thursday reaffirmed that the United States will keep up its pressure on North Korea financially and otherwise. Lee Seung-jae has this report.
Things have rarely looked so rosy on the Korean Peninsula ahead of next week's Inter-Korean Summit and the planned Washington-Pyongyang meeting set for some time in May or early June. However, the United States remained firm on its continued financial and diplomatic pressure on the North to get the regime to surrender its nuclear weapons program. U.S. Disarmament Ambassador Robert Wood, attending a news conference at the UN headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, reaffirmed the Trump administration's stance on the North.
We will be looking at this in this preparatory committee meeting to continue to put pressure on North Korea to fulfill its obligations. Again, the United States remains committed to the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea.
Wood added that the U.S. delegation would be looking for support at the 2-week conference on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is set to open in Geneva next Monday. With the U.S.-North Korea summit planned to take place after the Inter-Korean Summit, Ambassador Wood declined to reveal the details of the U.S. strategy for the denuclearization of North Korea, but noted that President Trump has made it clear he would not pursue a traditional process. He added that Trump's role will be important, but it will take 2 to make it happen.
His abilities are going to be very important, but like anything else, it takes 2 to tango, and the North has to be willing to take steps that the North itself has said in the past it was willing to take.
Back in February, the U.S. envoy stated that the North is only months away from obtaining the capability to hit U.S. territory with a nuclear weapon and must be disarmed, dismissing Pyongyang's diplomatic thaw with Seoul as a charm offensive. While North Korea has shown its willingness to completely denuclearize, watchers continue to remain on guard. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Every spring, Fortune magazine releases a list of the world's greatest leaders. And this year, South Korean President Moon Jae-in has landed in 4th place, mainly for his key role in arranging talks between the two Koreas, as well as talks between the United States and North Korea. It's an even more distinguishing accolade, perhaps, considering Fortune is ranking not just government leaders, but private individuals and even political movements. Our Park Hee-jun has the details.
Just a week before the historic 2018 Inter-Korean Summit, South Korean President Moon Jae-in earns a new accolade. Fortune magazine has named President Moon as the 4th greatest leader in the world in its Spring 2018 Greatest Leaders list. President Moon is the highest-ranking individual on the list, with the top 3 spots being taken by movements or foundations. He earned the ranking for his diplomatic approach of extending an olive branch to North Korea. Less than a year has passed since President Moon took office in May, but already he's had a pivotal role in bridging the gap between Pyongyang and the international community. He brought the Kim Jong-un regime to the negotiating table, which has led to the arrangements for the Inter-Korean Summit and the possible U.S.-North Korea Summit in late May or early June. The recent breakthrough began with the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, when North Korea accepted Moon's overtures and took part in the Games. In the eyes of Fortune magazine, such progress could be a possible prelude to reconciliation between the two Koreas. Fortune also credited President Moon for his efforts in creating a fairer economy through raising the minimum wage, expanding health coverage, and tackling the issue of Korea's powerful chaebol conglomerates. Meanwhile, Moon was listed in Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential people of 2018. He was included in the leaders category alongside U.S. President Donald Trump, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
South Korea's chief economic policymaker is in Washington for the G20 finance ministers meeting and the IMF World Bank annual spring meeting. On the sidelines of those meetings, Kim Dong-yeon met with the head of the IMF, and they discussed making South Korea's foreign exchange market more transparent. Kim Hae-sung reports.
South Korea's Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon met with IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde in Washington on Thursday to discuss currency market issues. On the sidelines of the G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting, Minister Kim said Seoul is working on raising the transparency of its forex market, including making its currency market intervention records public. He said the government is looking into the frequency of disclosing the data while taking South Korea's economic structure and other countries' disclosure cases into consideration. According to Seoul's finance ministry, Lagarde said the IMF has repeatedly recommended South Korea improve its forex market transparency, adding that disclosing the records will help support the country's macroeconomic stability. She added that the negative effects won't be too pronounced given South Korea's strong economic fundamentals and financial market environment. Minister Kim is scheduled to meet U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin on Saturday to discuss the same issue. Meanwhile, the finance minister also met with World Bank chief Jim Yong Kim. They agreed to expand cooperation in areas like infrastructure projects in developing countries through funding and knowledge-sharing programs. In addition, Seoul's finance ministry said the government will increase funding to the World Bank's regional office in South Korea to expand operations. Minister Kim also invited the World Bank chief to the annual meeting of the African Development Bank Group, which will be held in Korea's southeastern port city of Busan in May. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Today is Korea's National Day of Persons with Disabilities, and many events are being held across the country to mark the occasion amid calls for improvements in the quality of life of the disabled. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
In Korea, around 2.8 million people are estimated to have some kind of disability, according to the Ministry of Health and Welfare. Among them, 1 in 2 disabled people were aged 65 or older, while 8 out of 10 disabled people were found to be suffering from chronic diseases such as high blood pressure and diabetes. Despite their vulnerability to these illnesses, many disabled people's living conditions prevent them from taking care of their health by themselves. According to data by the Ministry of Employment and Labor, the average monthly wage of the disabled was around $386. That's around just 30% of the earnings made by those receiving the minimum wage. And 1 out of 4 disabled people were found to live alone. Meanwhile, more than 1,000 cases of restriction and discrimination against the disabled are reported to the National Human Rights Commission of Korea each year, despite a 2008 law prohibiting such cases. These cases range from limitations in accessing facilities or transportation to mistreatment and not being able to receive proper information. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
Would North Korea perhaps make some major changes to its policies at the ruling Workers' Party meeting today? Eyes are on what might come out of this meeting, especially as North Korea's summits with South Korea and the U.S. are fast approaching. Now, this policy gathering over in Pyongyang is the same meeting as the one back in 2013 when Kim Jong-un adopted his signature policy on nuclear and economic development. Our Oh Jung-hee has more.
North Korea kicked off the third plenary session of its ruling Workers' Party's Central Committee this Friday. The Central Committee's plenary meeting is usually held when there's a need for the party to decide or modify its policy direction. At this meeting in March 2013, the Workers' Party adopted Kim Jong-un's signature Pyeongjin policy, which seeks for both nuclear and economic development.
And there's rising speculation that in Friday's meeting we could see some changes to that policy. A report from Pyongyang's state-run Korean Central News Agency on Thursday hinted that the meeting will decide on new policies in line with, quote, the important historic period. That's apparently in reference to the Inter-Korean Summit only a week away and the first ever Washington-Pyongyang summit that's currently in the works. With these talks expected to focus on denuclearization, the regime could show its willingness to negotiate on that. It may stress the precondition that the regime's security has to be guaranteed first, or it might choose not to call itself a nuclear state but a strategic country. The party could also show a willingness to improve relations with Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo and seek a peaceful coexistence within the international community. Pundits say the reason for Pyongyang to hold this meeting at this time could be because it needs to provide its people with policy-based justifications for whatever agreements North Korea reaches with Seoul and Washington at the upcoming summits. 오정희, Arirang News.
And to tell us more about this, Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, a research fellow at the Asa Institute for Policy Studies, joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so today, North Korea is holding its plenary session of its Workers' Party, and this meeting comes after Trump's pick for his new U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, recently visited Pyongyang to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So at this point, what could have been discussed at this meeting and what can we expect from it?
Well, North Korea's Workers' Party's plenary session is a platform for the North Korea's ruling party to discuss about policy doctrine, as well as to either to reaffirm or change the policy guidance for the party. So this is an opportunity, I believe, for Kim Jong-un to report to the senior and the lay members of the party about the recent developments in the inter-Korean dialogue, as well as the relationship between North Korea and the United States in regards to the denuclearization negotiations. So, in the process of reporting about the recent developments, Kim is likely to describe what the policy stance is on the part of North Korea regarding denuclearization, and is going to explain this in more concrete terms, because from the North Korea's point of view, this is an opportunity to signal to the United States what kind of a negotiations position North Korea will have ahead of the summit.
So like you said, eyes are on what kind of policies may be out in regards to North Korea's denuclearization, as well as we're talking about denuclearization. We know that back in the 2013, during the same meeting, Kim Jong-un's signature policy, that Pyeongjin policy on nuclear and economic development, was adopted. So any changes that we can expect on that policy?
Well, hopefully there will be some changes to the policy doctrine, because Pyeongjin, which means dual pursuit of nuclear and economic development, it's in direct contradiction to the idea of denuclearization.
Right.
You cannot have nuclear development on one hand, have denuclearization on the other hand. So it's definitely North Korea is right now under, no pressure, but under demands it's required to change its policy doctrine. We'd like to see what kind of language North Korea is going to use from now on. We really don't know how North Korea is going to reconcile its recent drive for nuclear development and the sudden change of position towards peace settlement with the United States and South Korea. So it's going to be quite creative in a way for North Korea to reconcile these two realities. So very much looking forward to hearing what North Koreans say about this.
All right, then what are the chances that we might see North Korea officially talk about denuclearization and how perhaps come up with some policies that says that North Korea is moving toward a denuclearization?
Well, they'll have to make an announcement about that, because this is this is an important time for them. There will be Inter-Korean Summit and the U.S. DPRK Summit following this plenary session. So if they are really serious about negotiation with South Korea and the United States, then they should really lay out what kind of negotiation position they have. So the key key issue here is clearly about denuclearization. We know that North Korea has so far denied the idea of giving up nuclear weapons.
Right.
But on the other hand, the most important condition on the part of the United States is complete denuclearization of North Korea. So one indicator of where North Korea is heading right now is the outcome of the meeting between Pompeo and Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
Apparently the meeting went well. And then we know that because the US DPRK summit is going ahead. So definitely it looks like North Korea has somehow accepted some of the concept of a complete denuclearization that the United States has been pushing forward so far.
What are the chances that we might see North Korea officially talk about the upcoming summit with President Trump?
Well, I think the most likely thing to happen at the plenary session would be for Kim Jong-un to update senior members and the lay members of the party about the recent developments in US DPRK relations. Whether Kim Jong-un is going to make a surprising announcement about the upcoming US DPRK summit, I'm a little bit doubtful about that because we don't know yet where and when the summit is going to take place between Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Right.
We don't know anything about that yet. Apparently, that's being discussed intensely between the two sides. And given the culture in Pyongyang and the culture in Washington as well, it's likely that we're going to hear from the Washington side first, probably with one of the leaks to the major newspapers in the United States. That's my expectation.
So you think it's going to come out of the U.S. first?
Yeah, that's
decided.
Well, that's my guess. Yes.
All right. Now let's shift our focus a little bit. We heard earlier in our newscast that a direct communication hotline that would allow President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to talk to each other directly is being hooked up today. So what kind of meaning does this serve for the two Koreas?
Well, first of all, this serves a symbolic meaning. This is not the first time that there will be a hotline established between the high level hotline between North Korea and South Korea. It's more of a restoration of the hotline. So in that sense, it's a symbolic message for the rest of the world that the inter-Korean relation has been restored to the full extent that we used to see in 10 years ago during the height of the Sunshine Policy days. So that's one. But then on the more practical matters, I believe the South Korea and North Korea can use the hotline to come up with a very quick discussion about what kind of policy stance that each side will take regarding denuclearization and about the possibility of accidental tension taking place in the Korean Peninsula. So in that sense, this really diminished gap in communication between the two Koreas.
So we don't know the exact date that the two leaders will actually talk to one another through this hotline. I mean, we've heard reports today that it might come as early as this weekend. But what's your expectations on that, and what would the two talk about once they talk to each other?
Well, unlike the US DPRK summit, we pretty much know about the agenda for the Inter-Korean summit because there's been a very active discussion between the two sides about the agenda items. So there will be no, essentially a strong need for the two leaders to pick up the phone and talk to each other to settle some contentious item on the agenda.
Right.
So if there's if the phone call takes place this weekend, it's going to be more about this very symbolic event where two leaders talk to each other. Probably they're going to greet each other and then express their possible expectation about the Inter-Korean summit.
All right. Now, there are growing expectations over this establishment of a peace treaty between the two Koreas. So, and President Moon actually said yesterday that North Korea hasn't really put forth any preconditions that the U.S. would not accept. And this is pretty big, what he said here, and saying because we thought that one of the preconditions that North Korea puts forth could be the withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Korea. But now President Moon is saying that's probably not the case. So.
Well, the North Korea stance towards the status of the U.S. troops in the Korean Peninsula actually has been pretty mixed in the recent years. We know from the private meetings between Kim Jong-il and the current leader's father and the South Korean visitors 10 years ago, as well as the more recent meeting between Kim Jong-un and the high-level envoys from South Korea. We know that the North Korean leaders have been pretty okay about the presence of U.S. troops in the Korean Peninsula. But at the same time, we know that officially North Korea has used the presence of U.S. troops as a justification for developing nuclear weapons. So, it's all in the North Korea's position in this regard is all over the map, so to speak. So to me, that indicates that North Korea doesn't really object to the presence of U.S. troops per se, but probably they object to the manner in which they are based here on an offensive position, for instance, or for example, what's really the presence of U.S. troops bring with them, such as the joint military exercises that South Korea and the United States conduct annually, as well as the idea of the extension of the nuclear umbrella to South Korea. And there are plenty of other deterrence measures that the U.S. offers to South Korea, which North Korea interpret to be hostile towards them. So I think North Korea would rather address these issues rather than the issue of the number of U.S. troops in the Korean Peninsula. So I think North Korea has shown that they can be flexible about this issue.
So going kind of back to the issue of denuclearization, we know the high-level talks were kind of scheduled for today, but it didn't happen, and it's probably going to happen sometime next week to set the, like you said, the agenda for the summit, but it hasn't been set yet officially. So what are your thoughts on that? Where would this go?
Well, even though there's nothing has been written on the stone when it comes to the inter-Korean summit agenda, we know that it's going to be more about affirmation of the positive developments that have taken so far this year. It's also going to be an affirmation of the agreement between the two Koreas about the future direction of the inter-Korean relations. And also we expect North Korea to express something in regard to their stance towards denuclearization. So North Korea has two opportunities to describe what kind of negotiation position they're going to have before the US-DPRK summit. So one is the plenary session taking place today, and the second will be the inter-Korean summit. And I think North Korea will use these opportunities to crystallize what kind of positions they have.
All right. So over in the U.S., President Trump said Wednesday that the United States will do everything that it can to make this Trump-Kim summit a success. But he did give a stick with that carrot, saying that, but if he doesn't think this is going to bear fruit, he's going to walk away from the talks. So,
well, this combination of carrot and stick is definitely a classic Trump. He has said the same thing about multiple other issues, the war between Mexico and the United States, free trade agreements, NATO, so forth and so forth. So this is not surprising coming from him. But on the other hand, I think what Trump said, I mean, the first part being the positive disposition towards the summit, but then the second being the stick. I think this is, the second part is more of a message to the domestic audience in the United States. There's been some worry in the security establishment in the United States, as well as from the American society, that President Trump was actually falling for a trap, a North Korean trap, by agreeing to having this summit so soon, and before North Korea and the United States have settled down on the terms of negotiation. So I think President Trump is trying to indicate, or send a strong message to the critics of, himself, and also those people who are worried about the outcome of the summit, that he's aware of the downside risk of the summit. And then he's promising to everybody that he's going to be who he is, unpredictable, and then somebody who can always do a very surprise action.
So it seems that it's very unlikely that he will probably walk away from the summit. That's already been
said, he's very much invested in the process, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your insight today.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks.
And that does it from me, but we'll be back next week at 4 p.m. Korea time with an in-depth look at ongoing issues here in Korea and around the world, so check back with us then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.